Hello, my name is Angelina Murray, and I'm just going to do a brief video lesson tutorial today. We'll primarily be focusing on voice, but some of these things can also be useful for instrumentalists, particularly if it's a woodwind or brass instrument learner. And this might also be helpful to those of you who are thinking of teaching music on your own time. So first things first, I have just got back from London with my Master's in Music Education. I've got a Bachelor's of Science in Vocal Performance, so that's where the majority of my musical knowledge comes from, is for the voice. And I have an Associate's degree in Music Composition. I also play a lot of instruments. One of the things about music composition is if you're going to create work, I think it's really important to get a general understanding of the instruments you're writing for. So I have a lot of basic understandings for many instruments, but I primarily specialize in voice, cello, trombone, and piano. So at the first lesson, I would obviously want to know more about my student, what their general interests are in music, and maybe even outside of music, because there are a lot of skills that we can go over in our music lessons that are very transferable outside of the classroom. And I want to make sure that all of our lessons are relevant to my students. Alright, so the first thing that I need to find out from my student or students is where they're currently at, what their knowledge is already with music, what experiences they've already had, if you've already sung or played an instrument before, or if this is your first time, if you've been in a group, maybe done group work. I also need to know if there's ever been any injuries or health concerns that might impact the student and how they're learning, and it's not just physical issues that they might have had. For instance, if you've ever had like back surgery, that's usually for older students, but if you've ever injured your hands, that can affect how you're playing an instrument. Or if you've had asthma, that can affect your breathing as well. So we want to bear all of that in mind. Also, we want to know if your students do any physical work as a job, or if they do any sports that could put them at a higher risk for certain things, like injuring your hands in particular, or your arms, because everything in your body works in conjuncture in order to play an instrument, which may be you as the instrument for us vocalists. So you want to make sure that you have all of that information up front. That way you can cater to your students' needs while also going over the basics. Alright, so the first thing we do in a lesson after we have gone over the basics and gotten our introductions out of the way is we're going to look at posture and stance, because that's very important regardless of if you're a vocalist or an instrumentalist. Your breath support is necessary to play your instrument. So you want to have your feet in front of you, and an easy way to figure out where they're going to be when you're standing is you want your feet spaced apart, roughly in line with your hips, and your shoulders will be roughly in line with your hips as well. Now you can place one foot slightly in front or behind the other foot, but make sure that that space in between is still there, because that's going to give you that structure. You want your back to be straight, but you don't want too much tension, because then your whole body is going to tense up, and it needs to be relaxed enough in order to get good breath support to come out. So that's the first thing you do with your posture. You also want to make sure that your head is facing forward. If it's too much down right here, you can bend your neck a little bit, and again that's going to put some pressure and constrict your throat, so you don't want that to be constricted. You're just going to make your life a lot easier if it's nice and open. Now if you're sitting, which some of you may be doing, you'll have a chair, and a lot of times people will sit on the chair and sit all the way back. Now that's great if you're doing office work, but for singing or for playing a woodwind or brass instrument, you don't want to do that. And the reason is that when you sit on a chair with a back, it's going to change how your back is laying. You're now using the chair for the support instead of supporting your back with the rest of your body. So if you sit up a little bit more to the front of the chair, you can still maintain your shoulders above your hips and your feet will be on the floor. That way you don't twist anything and get your posture messed up again. Alright, moving right along. Once you have got your student or yourself, once you have your posture down, you are going to focus on breathing techniques. We want to use the diaphragm. Now some teachers will refer to different types of breathing as high or low or mid-range. And the easiest way to identify incorrect breathing is the high breathing in particular. When you do high breathing, your shoulders will actually go up slightly. And high breathing is the same sort of breathing you do if you're picking up something really heavy and it's that grunt. So it gives you a very strong burst of air, but that's not what you want when you're singing or playing an instrument that requires a lot of breath for long phrases, because that's just very sharp, very short, and it's going to make you tired a lot faster, which is definitely not what we're out to do. We want to have fun, but we don't want to exhaust ourselves in the process. So high breathing has that issue there. Also, when you do high breathing, which the majority of people starting out with learning breathing techniques will have to overcome this, you will actually notice that with high breathing, if you're going to hit a higher note, a lot of people will use high breathing even if they are using the diaphragm for everything else. They'll unconsciously start to use high breathing when the notes are getting higher and higher, and that's because in your head you're thinking, I need to go high, and oftentimes they'll get a little nervous when they get higher and they don't know if they can hit those notes, so they'll put an extra oomph, but they'll do it with the high breathing, and that is not what you want to do. You want to use your diaphragm. So we are avoiding high breathing as much as possible, and the first exercise we're going to do for that is actually quite simple. I'm going to count to 4, which you will inhale for 4 counts, and then you're going to exhale, and you're going to do it in 2 different ways. You'll go so it just repeats. You'll have the S's and then the sudden ones. And the reason that we do the sudden ones is because you're going tsk, 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 tsk. That's kind of like that grunt, and we want to make sure that you're not using your high breathing for that. Okay, and once we inhale for 4 counts, then we're going to count how many times we can go through with that breathing exercise, and then we'll inhale for 3 counts, and then 2, and then 1. So I'm going to give you an example of it. You can do this along with me if you so choose. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's halfway through, right? Almost in 3. Now we're going to inhale for 3 counts. The 1, 2, 3, 4. So we would go through that all the way through, and if you'll notice, the more you do this exercise, the more breath you have in the long run. Because the first time, when we inhaled for 4, I only made it 2.5 times through the exercise. Just twice all the way through and then halfway, right? But when I inhaled for 3, took a bigger breath, a little bit better control with the exhale, keeping more of that air inside, and we lasted all the way through for 3. And what I found is when I do this with my students, that by the time that they've inhaled for 1, they will last much longer with the breathing, exhaling. And that's great because that'll give you a lot more energy and a lot more power for long phrases and also for the higher notes, because you don't want to use a grunt and a high breath when you're trying to get higher notes. You want to use more air, and you want the diaphragm to press that out when you need an extra kick. So that's what we open with. We do breathing exercises. We might also do a yawning exercise. And the reason that we do that is because we want to overcome the breaks in the voice. A lot of people will have issues between their so-called chest and head voice. And basically, the difference between those is that you've got muscles in your neck. And when you're using your chest voice, which is often what people hear when they're belting music, that would be the chest voice, right? And that's using a specific muscle in your throat. But then, if you're using your head voice, you're using the other muscle. So a head voice example would be and you should be able to hear a slight difference there. Now if I go higher, that would be head voice. Chest voice would be so there's a lot of a difference in the sound quality between those two. But a lot of teachers will focus on having you learn one way or the other, but it's one voice. So many times students will struggle between switching between those voices, and that's what we call breaks, where you're going up a scale and instead of going they'll go You hear that difference right there? That's what is considered a break. So the yawning exercise is one thing that you do in order to overcome it, because when you're yawning, you're using plenty of air, very relaxed, and you can do lots of notes. So first you yawn, of course, and then you go and you do it with different pitches all the way down the scale. That way, whenever you have an issue of a break, you can try and get the student to overcome that. And use lots of movement as well. Sometimes moving around will help. So that is the initial entrance. And that's how we would start our exercises with lessons. Works a lot better when you have a student in front of you though. And finally, depending on how far you've gotten so far in your lesson, the next step would be ear training, because I want to know where my students currently are in being able to identify different pitches. So the ear training was also apparent when I was giving an example between a chest and head voice, as those terms used. So if they can't notice the difference there, then you're going to have a lot more ear training exercises that you're going to want to incorporate into your lessons. So I always have a piano with me when I'm giving voice lessons. Some students find it easier to imitate a voice if they hear it on a different instrument, like the piano, and some have really hard time imitating instruments, but they're really good at imitating the human voice. So it's really a matter of working with each student to find out which way they learn best and to determine where their strengths currently are and where their weaknesses are, and then building on it. So that is my introductory tutorial for you. There are just a few little examples of exercises which I could go into more if you like. And I hope you have a lovely day and this proved useful to you. Good evening.